We often look to the past to understand ourselves. Tonight, we turn our attention to the year 1895 and the solemn story of Dora Lanahan. It's a case that reminds us that behind historical records are real people whose lives were irrevocably changed by the events that transpired. This is their story, as best as it can be told. In the final years of the 19th century, Birmingham, Alabama was a city of explosive growth and stark contrasts. Dubbed the Magic City for its rapid industrial expansion, its skyline was dominated by the smoke and fire of iron foundries and steel mills. It was a place of new money and old traditions, where the ambition of the Gilded Age met the rigid social codes of the American South. Beneath the veneer of progress and prosperity, however, lay the same human passions and darkness found in any city. In the autumn of 1895, this vibrant, striving community would be captivated and horrified by a crime that would expose the secrets of one of its prominent families and end the life of a beloved young woman. Dora Lanahan was, by all contemporary accounts, the embodiment of Southern grace and charm. At 21 years old, she was known throughout Birmingham for her beauty, her kind disposition, and her cheerful personality. The daughter of a respected railroad engineer, Dora came from a comfortable, middle-class family and was active in the city's social circles. She was described as an accomplished young woman, one who played the piano and had a wide circle of friends and admirers. She lived with her mother and siblings on the city's south side, in a home that was often filled with the laughter and conversation of visiting friends. Dora was not just a pretty face. She was a dutiful daughter and a loving sister, a young woman with a future that seemed bright and full of promise. In 1895, that future appeared to be taking shape as she was happily engaged to be married to a man from one of Birmingham's most well-known industrial families. Her fiancé was 25-year-old Richard Hawes. On the surface, he was an ideal match. His father, Richard Hawes Sr., was a wealthy and respected iron magnate, the owner of the successful Hawes Foundry. The younger Richard served as the superintendent of the family business and was seen as a man of means and social standing. He and Dora had been courting for some time, and their engagement was seen as a suitable union between two respectable families. Beneath this polished exterior, however, Richard Hawes was a man in turmoil. The national economic downturn, known as the Panic of 1893, had hit the iron industry hard, and it was later revealed that both Hawes and the family business were in serious financial trouble. Furthermore, friends would later testify that Hawes had a volatile temper and a reputation for being overbearing. He had reportedly expressed doubts about his impending marriage, feeling trapped by his engagement to Dora Lanahan. The day after Thanksgiving, on Friday, November 29, 1895, Dora Lanahan was preparing for an afternoon outing. She told her mother she was going to meet Richard Hawes, who was to take her for a buggy ride. She dressed warmly for the autumn weather, put on her hat and gloves, and walked out of her family home around 3 p.m. It was the last time her family would ever see her alive. As the hours turned from afternoon to evening, the Lanahan family began to worry. Dora was punctual and would never stay out late without sending word. Her brother went out to search for her,
visiting the homes of friends and making inquiries, but no one had seen her. When contacted, Richard Hawes claimed that Dora had never arrived for their meeting. He said he waited for her, but she failed to appear. Panic set in. The following day, Dora's disappearance was reported to the police, and the search began in earnest, with her description circulated throughout the city. But as the days passed with no word, a terrible sense of dread descended upon her family and the community.
More than 2 weeks later, on December 16th, the search took a horrifying turn. A black man named William Johnson was walking his dog near the shore of East Lake, a popular recreational area on the outskirts of Birmingham. There, partially submerged in the shallow water, he found a large, heavy trunk. Prying it open, he made a gruesome discovery. Inside was the torso of a woman, wrapped in burlap sacking. The head, arms, and lower legs were missing. The local constable was summoned, and the remains were taken to an undertaker's establishment. As news of the discovery spread, Dora's brother and her dentist went to view the body. Though a visual identification was impossible, the torso's proportions matched Dora's, and the dentist was able to identify a distinctive scar from a childhood injury. There was little doubt that the search for the missing Miss Lanahan was over. The question now was not where she was, but who could have committed such a monstrous act. Suspicion immediately fell upon Richard Hawes, the last person who was supposed to have seen Dora. He maintained his story that she had never shown up for their appointment, but his calm demeanor struck many as unnerving. The police turned their attention to the Hawes Foundry, the industrial heart of his family's empire. The search of the foundry began, and what investigators found painted a terrifying picture. Inside one of the large furnaces used for melting iron, they sifted through the ash and debris. There, they discovered fragments of human bone, including pieces of a skull that had been subjected to intense heat. They also found several hairpins, buttons from a woman's glove, and the metal clasps from a pair of shoes, all of which were later identified by Dora's family as belonging to her. It became terrifyingly clear what had happened. The killer had dismembered Dora's body, placed her head and limbs into the foundry's furnace to be incinerated, and packed her torso into a trunk to be disposed of elsewhere. With the evidence from the foundry, the police began to construct a powerful, albeit circumstantial, case against Richard Hawes. They discovered bloodstains on the floor of a room in his family's home, which appeared to have been recently and inexpertly scrubbed. Witnesses came forward who had seen Hawes on the night of Dora's disappearance driving his buggy toward Eastlake with a large trunk in the back. A livery stable owner confirmed that Hawes had hired a horse and buggy that night, and that the vehicle's cushions were later found to be stained with blood. The trunk itself was identified as one that had been in the Hawes' home. The motive, the prosecution argued, was born of desperation. Weighed down by debt and feeling trapped in an engagement he no longer wanted, Richard Hawes had decided that murder was his only way out. He was arrested and charged with the murder of his fiancée, Dora Lanahan. The stage was set for one of the most sensational trials in Alabama's history. The trial of Richard Hawes began in January 1896 and captivated the nation. The press descended on Birmingham, and yellow journalism fanned the flames of public outrage, portraying Hawes as a cold-blooded monster. The prosecution, led by the skilled William C. Ward, methodically presented its web of circumstantial evidence: the bone fragments from the furnace, the hairpins and buttons, the bloodstains, and the multiple witnesses who linked Hawes to the buggy and the trunk. The defense, facing a mountain of evidence and intense public animosity, resorted to attacking the victim's character. They made shocking and unsubstantiated claims that Dora Lanahan was pregnant by another man and had died from a botched abortion, suggesting that someone else had disposed of her body. This tactic, designed to create reasonable doubt, horrified the public and the Lanahan family, who saw it as a desperate and cruel attempt to defile the memory of a woman who could no longer defend herself. Hawes maintained his innocence from the witness stand, but his testimony was seen as arrogant and unconvincing. On February 12, 1896, after deliberating for just over 2 hours, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree, with a sentence of death by hanging. Richard Hawes purportedly turned pale but showed little other emotion as his fate was sealed. His lawyers immediately began a series of appeals that would last for nearly 2 years, going all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Every appeal was denied. His execution was set for February 25, 1898. In his final days, Hawes continued to profess his innocence, though he also expressed a newfound religious conviction. On the day of his execution, he was led to the gallows in the yard of the Jefferson County Jail. A large crowd gathered outside the walls, waiting to hear the news. At 11:30 a.m., Richard Hawes was executed. His last words were reported to be a simple prayer: "Justice, in the eyes of the law and the public, had been served."
The case of Dora Lanahan left a deep and lasting scar on the city of Birmingham. It was a tragedy that brought together themes of class, industry, and hidden desperation in the New South. The Hawes family, once titans of industry, were disgraced and financially ruined by the ordeal. The Lanahan family was left to mourn the loss of a daughter and sister whose name had been dragged through the mud in a desperate attempt to save her killer. But beyond the scandal and the sensationalism, the case is, at its heart, the story of a life cut short. Dora Lanahan is remembered not for the gruesome headlines her death produced, but as a vibrant, loved, and cherished young woman whose future was stolen from her. Her story is a solemn reminder that behind every famous case lies a quiet, personal tragedy. Thank you for spending this time with us. Reflecting on these past events is a way of remembering the individuals involved and the impact their stories had on their communities. If you have any thoughts on today's case, we invite you to share them respectfully in the comments below. We hope you will join us again for our next true crime case.